I'm gonna start off with Jeffrey's question that we had built the entry signals for in yesterday's BloodHound workshop. So I rewrote Jeffrey's question here regarding the short term and this long term system here. So yesterday we built the entry conditions, basically the entry signals, right, in the BloodHound workshop. So today in BlackBird, now this is where we address the profit-taking aspect of this idea or of this system here. So I guess, so we need to cover a little bit of an overview, so we have a bigger picture of what's going on. So so let me cover the signals first, right? So there's two different types of signals basically, right? There's the short-term signal, which is based on, I'm going to have to close BlackBird here. All right. So the short-term signals are based on this Gaussian filter indicator. And there's several of them out there. I'm using the one from lizardtrader.com, right? But there's one on NinjaTrader's AppShare that actually I think there was something wrong with it because I couldn't find it in BloodHound. So I actually used the Lizard Trader one instead. And then there's some Gaussian filters probably on Futures.io as well. So anyways, this is a Gaussian filter indicator. And whenever it reverses direction, right, a trade signal is generated. And so the short term is the overriding entry signal. So the short term, reversal points, will always generate a signal and always open a position. So, and then sometimes when the short term and the long term indicator agree in the same direction, so the long term indicator is the ADX VMA, right? So if the short term is rising and the ADX is rising, then that will generate a secondary signal, right? So we can see we have two long signals here. So the first long signal came from the short-term Gaussian filter indicator, and the second long signal here comes from the short-term indicator rising, but also the ADX VMA started to rise, right? It went into an uptrend. So they're both in agreement there. Now, if you do get two signals like this in a row, that doesn't mean that you're going to open a secondary position, right? So only one position at a time is opened. So this system doesn't scale in additional contracts, right? So if the system is set up to trade one contract, it's not going to open two contracts, right? So in other words, the secondary signal would just be ignored if the if the position from the first entry signal is still open, right? So when this first long signal occurs, right? When this first signal occurs, if the long trade is still open when the second long signal occurs, then nothing's going to happen, right? So there's no scaling in. There's no doubling down or anything like that going on here. All right, so so now we can get to the profit taking here. So when we have just the short-term signal only, then the system is just going for a small 10-tick profit, right? So in other words, the short-term signals that come from just the Gaussian moving average, reversing direction, you're just supposed to take a 10-tick target. But then when the short-term and the long-term indicator agree in direction, so that's what the second long signal is here, then we are to get rid of the 10-tick profit target and just go along for the ride, right? So hopefully, the point is when the long-term and the short-term indicators are in agreement, that there's going to be a longer trend run. So therefore, you you cancel the 10 tick profit and just go along for the ride. But then at some point we can see here that the ADX VMA goes flat. So now the two indicators are no longer in agreement. So let's see here. It's probably, I think it's this bar right here that the long-term indicator now no longer agrees with the short-term indicator. So now so that would be rule number 2. So if the long-term stops agreeing with the short-term during the trade, this is great. We got a perfect example right in front of us here. So then close the position, if the unrealized profit is 10 ticks or more, right? So basically you default back to the short-term signal only, right? Because the long-term indicator is no longer in an uptrend, but the short-term is still in an uptrend. So you just default back to the short-term signal, profit strategy, which is just take your 10 tick profits and get out, right? So, and of course, if you have more than 10 ticks, then then when you close out, you'll have more than 10 ticks there. And then we can see that the long-term indicator, basically the ADX VMA starts sloping back up, right? Starts moving upwards again. And so now we have another short-term and long-term signal together. And so we're basically back in and following rule number 2 again, which is just open a position and go along for the ride with no profit target. Right. Yeah, so right here, let's see here. So basically, I'm going to draw some arrows here, right? So here's our first signal, so we'd get in with a market order roughly there, and then we would close out the position roughly somewhere there because the long-term indicator, right, stopped agreeing. So we would be flat on this bar at the open of this bar. And then we have another entry signal, which is a short-term and long-term entry signal. And so, you'd get into the trade somewhere around there. And then you would keep it open until this reversal signal occurs. And then that would close out somewhere around there, right? So this last one would be a bit of a loss, right? And then the short-term signal would then reverse, and then you would close out right there. So again, another loss. So as this short-term indicator is flip-flopping around, it's basically generating a bunch of reversal trades and a bunch of losses there, so on and so forth. So, but this area right here is a great example of kind of the complexity of this system when the system can go from a short-term signal only to a short-term and long-term signal together, and then you're changing your profit target conditions when that happens. So, all right, so with that, let's start building. All right, so I have BlackBird open. So this enters with a market order, and let's create a profit target here. So there's 10 ticks from the quick list, and there is no stop loss, right? So oops. So there are no stop losses used here. So really, what everything that's going to take place is inside of the profit target. So, all right, so we kind of have these orders started here, and we'll get back to the profit target. But first, let's add the entry signal source here, which will be the BloodHound signals that were built in yesterday's workshop. So let's open this up. And the first thing you need to do is load in the BloodHound template file, for the entry signals. So we'll use the ellipses button here with the 3 dots. And let's go to File. And right there on top of my, what do you call this? Quick list here again. So there's yesterday's BloodHound workshop file. So we'll load that in. There we go. And as a as good practice, we should always look at the logic template to make sure that the leaders are connected up correctly. So there you go. All those leaders look correct. And those leaders all look correct, right? So you always want to make sure that the result node is connected to the correct spot there. Right. Now, for the entry signals, we're going to use, so this is the short-term and the long-term signals there, right? So this guy is providing the short-term only entry signals, and this AND node and this group is providing the short-term and long-term signals, right? So, yeah, so this solver here, well, yeah, I'm going to have to close that out. That's producing, right, this first long signal when the Gaussian reverses direction, right? And then up here, the Gaussian reverses down, so it produced this short signal. Then the Gaussian reversed back up, and it produced this long signal, and then it reversed back down for the short signal. So, right. Now, this long signal, when the long-term and short-term indicator agree, and this long signal also is when the long-term and the short-term indicators agree, right? And so that, and there. So those two long signals, is coming from this group of nodes here. So, all right. So now, next step, to select our entry signal logic template. So, and there you go. It's the one in the middle. So actually, the short-term signal, it actually is not going to be used. So it was just kind of built as we were walking through the question yesterday. But it's not actually going to be used here. So, but I just left it in there just in case. So, but the ST and LT signal is the one that we're going to use for the entry signals. So, okay. And there's no exit signals here. No exit signals. So, all right. So we have our BloodHound entry signals set up. So what I'm going to do now is click OK. And I'm going to get rid of this BloodHound on the chart here. Right, so this BloodHound is not going to be necessary anymore. So I'm going to remove it from the chart. And we can see down here, BlackBird is telling us that we need to reload the chart. And that's because BlackBird wants to load its BloodHound onto the chart. Right, so the BloodHound that's being used internally inside of BlackBird wants to be loaded onto the chart there. So let's just hit F5. Click yes. There. All right. So now this is BloodHound right, coming from within BlackBird there. And let's select our entry signals there. There we go. All right, so now that we have our BloodHound on the chart, let's see here. All right, let's open BlackBird back up. And so now we're really getting to the interesting part of this, and that is setting up the profit target with all of these different, profit-taking, conditions here. All right. So, number one is pretty simple. Just place a 10-tick profit target. So, which we already have. Right. So we have a 10-tick profit defined. And so now we're going to go into the trailing actions. And so now we can set up some trailing rules for when the short-term and long-term signal occur, or actually agree in the same direction, right? And so to do that, that is what this other, and I got to close the interface here. So that is what this other logic template is for, right? It says short-term and long-term agree, right? So simply we're getting an output on every bar that the short-term and the long-term agree with each other, right? When they're both sloping in the same direction, right? So what this is telling us is that we have a short-term and long-term, in agreement. So that's identifying, right, rule number 2 here. And so if we have this, then we need to, remove the profit target and just go along for the ride. Right. So within our profit target, so we need to enable, some custom trailing rules here. So within our profit target, we're going to add a trailing rule here. All right, so when the short-term and long-term indicator agree, then we want no profit target. So for the trigger, so the way that this trailing rule can identify when the short-term and long-term agree, right, is we're going to read the BloodHound logic template, right? We're going to read the BloodHound signals. So for our trigger, we're going to use the BloodHound signals on the bottom here, right? So on the bottom is the BloodHound signals. And let's open this up a little bit. There we go. So for our BloodHound template, right, there is the workshop file. Right, so that's the file that we loaded into the signal source up top there. Right, we're using the same BloodHound file. And for the logic template, we want this short-term and long-term agree logic template here. Right, so that logic template is what we're looking at on the chart right now. So when, right, so we can see that this output is in the direction of the trade, right? So there are a bunch of long signals here, right? So there would be a long position open. So the signals are not in the opposite direction, but rather the signals are going to be in the same direction as the trade that's currently open, right? So, but actually, so we want to look for these signals here. And so we know that, if we see these signals coming from the short-term and long-term agreement, then we need to remove our profit target, right? We need to get rid of that 10-tick profit target and just try and go along for the ride. So that's our trigger, is monitoring the short-term and long-term agreement logic template here and look for signals in the same direction as the trade, as the trading direction. And now the action is going to be to, where is it? There we go. At the bottom there, we want to cancel the order, right? So we're canceling this profit target. We're getting rid of this profit target there. So, and that's it, right? So obviously, if we cancel this profit target, then you can't repeat canceling an order for a second time. So, right, once the order's gone, it's gone. So the repeat, we're just going to leave it at none. Leave it, because there's no repeating a cancel. Once the order has been canceled, you can't cancel it again. So, all right. So that's that. So that would be rule number 2. So now let's drop down here to rule number 3. So now, if the long term stops agreeing with the short term, right, during the trade, then close the position, right, if we have 10 ticks of unrealized profits. So we can also do that within a trailing roll here. So we're going to add another trailing roll. So let's see, what should we call this? All right, so basically something like this. So when the long term ends, then we want to try and grab 10 ticks of profit there. So let's go back into the trigger, and once again we're going to use a BloodHound signal and set up, right, our template file and select our logic template, that tells us when the short term and long term agree or don't agree, right? So obviously if there's no signal, then we know that the long term and the short term no longer agree with each other. Now, so what we're looking for now is no signal in the same direction, right? No signal in the same direction. So like I have marked up on the chart here, when the long-term indicator, the ADXVMA, when it stops agreeing, right, then there's no signal. There's no longer a long signal, right? So there's no signal in the same direction. So that's the situation we're looking for. So, yeah, sweet. All right, so we're looking for that. And then we need to also check, is there 10 ticks of profit? So we're going to have to switch over to the advanced tab now, right? So the first thing we're looking for is the BloodHound signal. And now the second thing we need to look for is the 10 ticks of unrealized profit, right? Is there an unrealized profit of 10 ticks? So we're going to add the profit or loss, right? So for those of you, who are kind of advanced BlackBird users, the delay is not going to work in this case, right? Because this 10 tick of profit, we're literally looking for, we literally want to check the unrealized profit, right? So we're not waiting for a 10 tick delay, right? So the delay is not going to work in this case. So we literally want to use the profit or loss, and that this trigger is looking at unrealized profits and losses. So let's add the profit or loss, and so the mode is going to be profit, and the units is going to be ticks, and so we're looking for a minimum of 10 ticks. And let's see here, the mode simultaneously. Let's see here. Yeah, so the mode is simultaneously, right? Because we both want, so there needs to be no BloodHound signal from this logic template, and at the same time, right, so on the bars where there's no signal, we also need that 10 ticks of profit together, right? So both conditions have to occur together or simultaneously. All right, so those are our two, conditions that we're looking for. And so now the action is to flatten the position, flatten the trade out. So there we go. All right. So we're not quite done yet. So in order for a trailing rule to be able to execute, the order has to exist, right? So the problem here is with the first trailing rule here, right? The first trailing rule actually cancels, right? It cancels this order. So if this profit target is canceled, then this second trailing rule can never execute because there is no profit target that has a trailing rule attached to it anymore, right? So, what would happen here? So, our great example here, let me put this back. Let's put this back to the entry signals, right? So we open up a long position, and then we get to this bar here. Actually, let's figure this out. Right, each bar is 10 ticks. Yeah, so there is quite a good chance that by the time this bar closes here, that the profit target was actually hit. Yeah, there's a good chance the profit target was hit before this bar closes. So then when this bar closes, a new position will be entered. Yeah, that's probably how this would play out. So interesting. All right. Yeah, so it looks like we would have our profit target hit right there just before this bar closes. And so then basically this long signal would be flat at the time this bar closes, and so another position would be open. So let's readjust our arrows. So this is most likely how this would play out. There. All right. So we get the second signal, and the long-term and short-term are in agreement. So when this second trade opens up, right, the profit target would be canceled. So by the time we get over here, where the long-term no longer agrees, there is no profit target to, right, there's no profit target to run this trailing rule, right? The profit target's gone. So we're going to have to adjust this canceling here, right? We're going to have to undo the canceling, right? Because that would just ruin this type of scenario situation here. So instead of canceling the order, what we'll do is we will move the order, and we'll move the order to, let's see here, we're going to take the entry price for the trade, and let's just move this order out to, say, 100 ticks. right? I don't think anybody would be disappointed in taking a 100-tick profit target. So, but also, there's probably no chance of the market ever running 100 ticks before, the short-term reverses direction or something like that, right? So, the worst case scenario is, we get a 100-tick profit target and we're out of the trade, right? Not too bad of a trade-off there. So what we've done is, instead of literally going with no profit target, we've just pushed that profit target way out there where it's probably never going to get hit. So effectively, that's removing the profit target. If it's so far out that it's not going to get hit, right, then in effect, you're removing that profit target. So out of the way of the market. So now that the profit target now still exists, now this trailing rule now has a chance to actually execute and flatten the trade, right, when the long-term indicator no longer agrees. Now that trailing rule can do its evaluation and check to see, do we have 10 ticks of unrealized profit? And if so, then flatten the trade out. So let's take a look here. Right, so this is definitely what I would call a workaround for rule number 3, right? So, if you were to automate this, if you were to write your own kind of custom strategy that adds a profit target and then removes a profit target, you could do that because there's no stop loss. But if there was a stop loss, you can't remove one of the orders and then add it back, because that violates OCO requirements of the exchange, right? But since there is no stop loss, then there's no OCO order set together. So I guess you could just place an order out there, for your profit target, which closes the position. As far as BlackBird, BlackBird doesn't have the ability to cancel an order and then add it back later on. That would, I don't know, that I'm not even sure what changes would be necessary in order to add a profit target back, after it's been canceled. I'm sure it would require quite a bit of a redesign on our menu system. We'd probably need a bunch of new options on the options tab. We'd probably need a bunch of new settings here on the options tab to make that possible. So for now, right, the easier thing to do is just move your profit target so far out that, even if it does get hit, great. What a wonderful problem to have, right? So, so I think that does it. That completes the last part of this question from Jeffrey.